Hey everybody, this is Rafi Zerb, and I got a video for you on the switch component in Foundation. So we're going to go over how to make a switch and some of the modifications that you can do with a switch. So if we take a look at the basic switch, it's something like this. So you can toggle the switch on and off, and the markup is pretty simple, and it is using a checkbox to create this style. So now I'm going to show you some of the markup and how to modify this component. So if we hop over to our editor here, and we're just going to copy and paste right from the docs. That's the easiest way to get going with the switch. I'm going to just go over some of the classes that are used to style this component. So we have this div with a class of switch, and that is what's creating the switch. Inside of that, there's two specific components. So one of them is the input type checkbox. So if we look over here, we got input type checkbox, and that is actually what is toggling the switch on and off. So you notice that the switch starts in the off position by default. When you click it, then it changes that state. Now the way to start the switch off in the on position is actually using the checkbox property checked. So checkbox checked means that the switch will start active. So you can use this attribute right on your switch component, right inside the input. And if you leave that off, then it'll start in the off position. So that's something that you can add manually when the page loads, or you can even use jQuery or JavaScript to add that attribute on as needed. So other classes that are important, so the switch input class that is on the input is what actually styles the switch, the checkbox, and it hides the checkbox visually. So we're masking the checkbox with this switch type of style. And this switch type style is actually created by the label. So the label in here that is attached to this checkbox is actually what's creating the style. So the switch paddle itself is this piece, and then the box around it is also being styled there with an after pseudo element. So the other important thing is the ID. So the ID on the checkbox is example switch, and that needs to match the ID for the label. So in this case, we're just using example switch here, but you can change it to anything you want. They just need to match this for attribute on the label. If they match, then it will actually toggle on and off. If they don't match, then that's what you want to look at first as the issue why it's not toggling on and off. And then lastly on this markup here, we have a span with a class of show for SR. So that means this particular content will show for a screen reader, and it's going to tell them what this toggle actually does. So it's more context to the switch itself. So this is for somebody who's visually impaired using a screen reader. They land on this switch. They can know what this switch does. So it says download kittens. It could be switch dark mode on. It could just be any type of function that the switch is doing. Just be specific to what that's actually doing. So that is the basics of the switch. Let's take a look at a radio switch. Okay, so the radio switch is actually using an input type radio instead of checkbox. So let's hop over to an example and take a look at how that works. So the difference here with a radio switch is that you'll have a group of switches that are together, and when you toggle one of them, they will then untoggle the other ones. So basically, because it's a radio, only one of them could be on or at the same time, on or active, let's say. So let's show you how that setup works. So again, we have switch, a div with the class of switch, so that's all the same. The difference now is that the input is type radio. Okay, and the way that these different radio switches are tied together, see they're all type radio, is this name of test group. So you see how there's a name here. So this name attribute is built into forms specifically for radios. And again, Foundation is creating these nice switch styles, but it is underneath the hood, it is a radio. So this name, if the name matches these other switch type radio, or sorry, input type radio, then it's going to be tied together. So that's how the browser knows that when you click on one of these, toggle the other two off. Now again, each one of these switches will have its own unique ID. So this is example switch 1, and the for attribute is also example switch 1, and then the next one is incremented to example switch 2. So just make sure that they have their unique IDs, but they are tied together with the name. So just to demonstrate how that works, if I changed the name of one of these, so let's just change that. Now it's only going to toggle the two that have the same name. The third one is now independent. So that's how that works. So this is how you use switches with radios as well. So switches also have sizing classes. So let's take a look at the sizing classes in Foundation. So we have tiny, small, and large. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these examples over and just show you the differences. So this is an example of tiny, small, and then a large switch. And let's actually put the default size in there as well. So the sizing is controlled with one single class. So we can chain on multiple classes to this component. So we have div with the class of switch, and then now we have the class of tiny on there. So that's going to make a tiny switch. And then we have a switch with a class of small, that's going to make a small switch. If you don't add any sizing classes onto it, then it will be the default size, which you can call medium, but it's really just the default size. And then over here we have our large switch. So that is how you use the sizing classes to modify the switch. And another really cool thing you can do with the switches is actually put text inside of them. So we have a section here called inner labels. And if we grab that code, I'll show you how that works. So let's hop over here. We'll put in our new example. So we can create this switch. Right now it's a large switch, and we have a question here. So you can put any text around it that you want. You can use a side label, whatever you want. But the switch in itself is just a div with a class of switch. So the difference here is only that we've put a couple extra spans in here. So we still have our span with a class of show for SR, and that's just going to describe what this switch does. And then we also added some spans in here. One is a class of switch active. And so switch active is when the switch is toggled on or active. And that's where you can actually put this piece of text in here. So you can change the text. Right now it's set to yes. And when the switch is inactive, it's set to no. And again, you can use the checked attribute to change that default state. So as you can see here now, because I added the checked attribute, it's in its on state, and now it's in its off state when I remove it. Or clicking on and off will do that. So what's happening here is that there is text that is laid into the switch, and and it is hidden for screen readers by default. So that is something that is handy for a screen reader. They can know if the switch is toggled on or off just based on the checkbox itself. So that takes care of reporting back what state the checkbox is in. So yeah, any type of text works here. So we could do on or off, which is the other common setup. So it fits just fine. Now, if you put really long text in here, it may overlap with the switch paddle. So you might need to make the switch paddle a little bit smaller to make everything fit inside of that. All right, and another thing I want to show you is also how to style the switch a little bit. So the most common thing is we want to make the switch rounded. So we want a little bit of radius on there. So let's go ahead and open up our CSS, and we're actually going to use Sass here just to do that real quick. So the thing that we want to target is the switch paddle. Again, that's the label, then that's what you're seeing over here. So we'll go ahead and target switch paddle. All right, and then we'll write in a border radius. And if you're using the Zurb stack, it's already going to use auto prefixer, so it's going to take care of the vendor prefixes for you. So we'll go ahead and set up the border radius, and then we also want to round this actual paddle, which is using an after pseudo element. So let's take that into consideration. So we'll add the after, and we'll also do border radius 5,000 pixels. So that's a pretty standard for rounding an object. If it was an image, it would be 50%, but in this case, it's a box. This works really well. So now we have our rounded switch and paddle. So it's the switch paddle class, add the border radius, and then also the after pseudo element on the switch paddle. That will take care of the border radius for the paddle itself. And while we're on the subject of styling this component, we can scroll down to the Sass reference. There's a ton of variables here that you can use to style the switches much faster. So I showed you how to make it round in regular CSS, but this can be done much quicker and easily in the Sass version using the settings file. So there's some variables here, and there's also a mix-in to create this component without having to use Foundation's built-in classes. I'm going to go ahead and just show you around the settings file a little bit for this component. So if we hop over to switch, so I'm just going to search for it here in the settings file, you can see all the alterations that you can make. So you could alter the default switch background, which was that gray color, the color it is when it's active, the height of the switch on default, tiny, small, and large. And then this is where you can also set the radius. So right now the radius sets a global radius. So if we set a global radius of, let's say, 3 pixels, it's going to be that border radius. And again, I just showed you a way to custom set a radius on that anyways. So you can change a lot of stuff here. And this component is really flexible. It's going to save you a lot of time instead of coding this by hand. It's a lot of magic with hiding a checkbox. So it's a really powerful component, and hope you enjoy using it. We teach this component and every component in Foundation in our Intro to Foundation class. So make sure you check that out. I'll put the link below. And this is Rafi from the Foundation team. Thanks for watching.